I'm heading out today. Please take care of the house. Here, this is the key. That's what my mother-in-law, who always dumped housework on me, said. I was really starting to resent her for it. I asked my husband to talk to her about it, but she played the victim and got my father-in-law on her side, turning the household chores into a family-approved duty for me. And then she started treating me like a maid, saying things like, "Haven't you cleaned the bathroom yet? I wanted to take a bath before my husband got home. And hey, give me a massage." I'm exhausted. While I was massaging that mother-in-law of mine, I realized something and started plotting a plan to get her out of the house. My name is Moira Johnson. I'm 24 years old. I've been a full-time housewife since I got married to my husband, David, 2 years ago. Being a housewife has been my dream since I was a little girl, and I was very satisfied with my life. David, whom I met at a college club, was unexpectedly mature and cool for his age, leaving a cool impression. At first, he was reserved, but it turned out he was just shy, and he started talking to me after we hung out with friends a few times. As we started talking, I realized we had a lot in common in terms of hobbies and food preferences, and we quickly became close friends. Gradually, we started going out just the two of us, and before I knew it, we were only meeting up alone. He proposed to me on my birthday during my junior year of college. David took me to a fancy restaurant to celebrate my birthday, and during the meal, when I mentioned that I'm 21 now, I really need to start thinking about job hunting, he said, "Well, how about you just work for me?" which was his cheesy way of proposing. Knowing that it was my dream to be a housewife, David promised to work hard so that he could make my dream come true. We got engaged while still in college, but decided to get married and live together after graduating, as that was a condition set by my parents. So we had our wedding and moved in together during our last spring break. We used the money we saved from our part-time jobs and some money our parents had set aside for our wedding. However, we were determined to live on our own without relying on our parents, so we rented a place that was affordable on David's starting salary. It was a bit of a walk from the station and the apartment was small, but I was happy to start my married life. Making breakfast and packing lunch for David, sending him off, welcoming him back when he was tired, and taking a bath together in our small bathroom. All of it was fun. Still, I sometimes wished for a slightly better life. Looking back now, maybe we would have been happier if we had just continued living by ourselves. Everything changed about 6 months ago. My husband and I, as well as my parents lived in New York, while David's parents had always lived in Florida due to his father's job. But then, his father was transferred back to the main office in New York. With this move, I suggested that we could build a duplex to live together. David's parents were in their 50s and in good health, and they didn't have any chronic illnesses that I knew of, so I optimistically thought that having them live close by wouldn't change our lives too much. Besides, since David is an only child, we knew we would end up living with his parents eventually. So, I thought a duplex could work. It might mean they won't meddle in our lives too much right away. It's definitely better than living together. And with that, we accepted their proposal. David's father worked for a very successful company and was quite wealthy, so he paid for most of the mortgage, and David only had to contribute about as much as our previous rent. It was a good deal to live in a new and bigger house without increasing our expenses. I had only met David's parents during the engagement and the wedding since they had always lived in Florida, so I was slightly anxious, but I convinced myself that they must be nice people since they were David's parents. I had no idea just how terrible his mother's personality could be. We found a duplex that was already built and just needed some modifications, so we were able to move in about 3 months after David's parents made the suggestion. We moved in mid-December. It's due to the stairs and layout of the house. The larger first floor went to David's parents, while we took the smaller second floor with a balcony. The entrances to our homes were completely separate, with stairs next to David's parents' door leading up to another door, which was our entrance. David's parents were set to move in the following April, but they decided to bring some of their clothes and furniture over during the New Year's holidays. So they suggested we spend New Year's Eve together. David's father would be on vacation starting the 28th, so even if they arrived on the 30th, we would have 2 days to work on moving their things. I figured the 4 of us could get everything settled in time to celebrate New Year's Eve together. However, their belongings arrived on the 29th, but David's parents themselves didn't show up until the evening of the 31st. It seems my father-in-law's work wrapping up got extended until the 30th, and although he told my mother-in-law to go on ahead, it looks like she refused, saying she didn't want to. and so it all ended up being pushed back to the 31st, for which he apologized to me. Seeing an unopened cardboard box, my mother-in-law asked, "Oh, you left it as it is?" When the packages arrived early, I thought about unpacking them, but after discussing it with David, we decided it wouldn't be right to open them without permission, so we left everything as it was. When my husband explained that, my mother-in-law said, "You could have." He said, "You could have opened them while playing with her hair and looking somewhat listless." The four of us did start to unpack, but of course, we only arrived on the evening of the 31st, and there was no way we could get everything put away that same day. We had planned to have dinner in the more spacious living room of my in-laws' house, which is also on the first floor and has a better layout than ours, but we ended up inviting them up to our place on the second floor out of necessity. My in-laws ate happily, saying the food was delicious, but they continued to relax in our living room even after the meal was finished. My father-in-law mentioned a few times that we should get back to unpacking, but my mother-in-law, sitting on our sofa and watching a year-end music program on TV, said she was so tired from the move and just kept lounging around. Since my mother-in-law didn't seem like she was going to move anytime soon, the rest of us reluctantly went back to unpack at my in-laws' house. Around the time the date changed to the New Year, when we came back to our place to toast the New Year, my mother-in-law was nowhere to be seen in the living room. The three of us looked around and found her, still in her clothes, asleep in mine and David's bedroom. Moreover, both the living room and the bedroom TV were left on, and beside the bed, there was the champagne I'd bought for toasting and the mixed nuts I'd stored in the cupboard. As I was at a loss for words in surprise, my father-in-law apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, my wife must be really exhausted from the move." And we did start unpacking right away after getting here. Please go easy on her. I knew it wasn't my father-in-law's fault, and I supposed he had a point, so we let him sleep in our bedroom as well, and David and I slept in the living room. The next morning, when my mother-in-law, who got up later than anyone else, finally woke up, my father-in-law scolded her, but she didn't seem the least bit sorry and said, "You were sleeping in a bed too, right? Sleeping on the sofa is tough at our age. They're young, they'll be fine." And to my astonishment, after getting ready, my mother-in-law told us she was going to meet a friend in New York and left. Even my usually patient father-in-law was angry at this, so ironically, David and I ended up having to calm him down. As late that night, when the date had already changed, my mother-in-law came back slightly drunk and sure enough went straight to our bedroom to sleep. Angry at this, my father-in-law said he would sleep on the sofa at my in-laws' house and left. The next day, my father-in-law went out to visit an executive who had taken care of him in New York, and after he left, my mother-in-law got up and went out again to meet a friend. And I don't know what she did, but she came back in the evening in a good mood, along with my father-in-law. Since David and I had desperately finished unpacking after my in-laws left, my father-in-law seemed satisfied with our work. We'd also pretty much finished setting up my in-laws' bedroom, so they slept at their house that night, and I finally got to sleep in my own bed. The next day, my in-laws went back to Florida. After seeing them off, I felt a wave of exhaustion and laid down on the living room sofa, and David said, "Mom is just too free-spirited. She's always been a free spirit, but I didn't think she was like that. Moira, I'm sorry for making you do all the work, but I think it's just this time. Even when my parents move here, we'll be living separately." Although I was angry at my mother-in-law for entering our bedroom without permission, sleeping in her clothes on our bed, and eating our food without asking, as well as for selfishly imposing on us and then leaving since, as David said, we will be living completely separately once the move is over. I decided not to complain. However, my mother-in-law's whimsical behavior only escalated after she moved here. Tuckman spring came, and my in-laws moved here with my father-in-law's job transfer. I was again made to help with the unpacking. That would have been fine by itself, but about 2 months after they moved, my mother-in-law started coming over to our house. Usually, after David left for work and I had finished cleaning up after breakfast around 10 a.m. my dolled-up mother-in-law would ring our doorbell. Then she'd say, "I'm going out today. Take care of the house for me, okay? Here, this is the key," and hand me the key to my in-laws' house before leaving. Whenever my mother-in-law just says what she wants and leaves, I end up begrudgingly doing the housework for her place as well. Usually, she comes back around 6 p.m., takes the keys from me, and welcomes my father-in-law as if nothing happened. At first, it was about once a week, so I kept quiet, thinking it was part of my duties as a daughter-in-law. However, gradually she started pushing more and more onto me, increasing it to 2 or 3 times a week, until I was almost completely taking over the housework at my in-laws' place. When she came to leave her keys as usual, I tried telling her I have my own housework to do, so I can't, but she just entered my house, looked around the living room and kitchen, and said, "Everything is so tidy. Just with you being able to clean up this fast in the morning, you must have plenty of time for our housework too." She then left the keys on the living room table and went out. Of course, I was reluctant to speak directly to my father-in-law about this, so I told David. He apologized for his mother's behavior and told me, "You can ignore my mom's whims," but seeing that I was still distressed, he agreed to talk to her about it in front of my father-in-law. We decided to have a meal together on my father-in-law's day off and bring it up then. Even though I was cooking, my mother-in-law just ignored me and watched TV. In front of my father-in-law, she acts as if she's normally helping with the housework. During the meal, David said, "Mom, it's fine if you go out, but please don't push your housework onto Moira." That's when my father-in-law scolded her, saying, "What are you doing? Didn't we agree before we moved here not to bother David and his wife? They have their own lives." Then my mother-in-law started crying and said, "I want to do the housework too, but recently my back has been hurting. Bending over is painful. Though I've been asking Moira for help, thinking it would be hard for her if I was around. I'm sorry, Moira. That was a lie. Just last weekend, when my father-in-law was on a business trip, she went out golfing with her friends. People with bad backs don't go golfing." But my father-in-law, not knowing any of this, said, "I didn't know your back was bad. Moira, I'm sorry, but could you help with the housework until she gets better? Of course we'll give you an allowance for it." It was as if his anger from moments ago was a lie, and he was now concerned about her. David seemed to believe her too, thinking, so that's the reason. Back at our house, just the two of us. I told him, "Your mom is lying about her back pain," but he just smiled and said, "Dad said he'd give us money and you've managed until now, so it's fine, right? You can cut corners on our housework. I'll talk to him about getting a generous allowance, and you can use it to buy whatever you want. In exchange, just increase my allowance a little." Since my in-laws moved here, I've realized that my father-in-law and David are just too kind. They've basic common sense, and will show anger when something goes against that, but their kindness makes them easily forgive my mother-in-law's simple excuses and even take her side. My mother-in-law knows this and manipulates them with her clever lies, eventually winning them over. Once the housework allowance started coming from my father-in-law, she began slacking off even more. She used to push housework onto me after he left, but now she'd make excuses like I can't move because my back hurts or I can't get up because I have headache and push everything from breakfast to dinner onto me. My father-in-law, completely unaware of her lies, would say, "Sorry to bother you." After he left, my mother-in-law would take a shower, get dressed up, and leave without a word. By this time, I'd been given a copy of the key to my in-laws' place, and before my father-in-law returned, she would come back home, look at the dinner I made, and start complaining, "Isn't the portion too small? Or can't you increase the number of dishes?" She'd also say things like, "You're getting an allowance, so don't slack off. The dress isn't ironed properly. Make sure you iron it properly. And haven't you cleaned the bath yet? I want us to take a bath before Dad comes back. And come on. I'm tired, give me a massage." She acted as if I was really her maid. Despite all this, when my father-in-law came home, she put on a show, praising us with comments like, "This is delicious, and Moira's housekeeping is even more meticulous than mine." So neither my father-in-law nor David noticed her true colors. And even when I opened up to David about it, all he would say was, "Just ignore her unreasonable demands." I had reached my limit with her attitude. When my father-in-law and David were not around, I considered secretly recording her behavior to show them and hopefully get them to do something about it. It was then that unexpected opportunity presented itself. It happened on the day my father-in-law was returning from a business trip. As usual, my mother-in-law sent him off and then left saying she was going to a spa with friends. And as usual, she returned home earlier than my father-in-law, complaining she was tired and demanding a massage from me. I thought to myself, "I'm more tired than you after doing all the housework, but you were just out having fun." Nonetheless, I massaged her shoulders and noticed a dark bruise on her neck. It looked unmistakably like a hickey. At first, I thought it might have been from my father-in-law, thinking they're quite something for their age. But then I remembered he had been away for about 5 days, and I doubted a hickey could last that long. Could my mother-in-law be having an affair? It seemed unlikely that she had so many friends in New York, given she had lived her whole life in Florida. Just with these thoughts in mind, I decided to hire a detective agency to investigate. Luckily, I knew her daily routine and that she would always go on a trip when my father-in-law was on a business trip, making it easy for the detectives to follow her. But to cut to the chase, my mother-in-law was having an affair, and she was doing so quite boldly. It took less than 2 weeks to get the results back after hiring a private investigator. My parents, I was at a loss for words when the investigator showed me photos and videos of my mother-in-law's affair. She was arm in arm with a man around David's age, walking into a hotel, and there were photos of her sharing a passionate kiss with a man in a hotel bar. More risk than I had imagined. Receiving this evidence, I was shaking with anger. It wasn't because she was pushing housework onto me while having an affair. I couldn't forgive her for betraying such a kind father-in-law. She was concerned about her health, hired me, and while my father-in-law was working hard, she was using the money he earned to have an affair with a younger man. I couldn't rest until I taught this dreadful mother-in-law a lesson. Since her birthday was coming up, I decided to put my plan into action on that day. Should we throw a surprise party for your wife? When I suggested this to my father-in-law, he listened to my idea with joy. Here was the plan. He would tell her he had work on that day and encourage my mother-in-law to have a birthday dinner with her lover. I'm going to invite Mom to dinner on the day. Let's surprise her at the hotel, I told my father-in-law. Trusting my words, he pretended to go to work in the evening and left. After sending him off with "It's a shame we can't spend your birthday together," my mother-in-law took more time than usual to dress up and left the house. When I had the investigator follow her, as expected, she went to the hotel where she usually meets her lover. Had she chosen a different place to go, I would have had to hurriedly contact my father-in-law to change the surprise location. But thankfully, she chose the usual place. As soon as I received a call from the investigator saying that my mother-in-law had arrived at the hotel, I rushed there by taxi. I had to let my father-in-law witness the truth before my mother-in-law, and the man disappeared into a room. By the time I arrived, I also received a message from my father-in-law saying, "I've arrived." Thanks to the information from the investigator, I knew that my mother-in-law was drinking with the man at a couple's seat in the bar, so I invited my father-in-law to join me at the bar, saying I still have time before our promise. My heart ached as my father-in-law seemed happy, wondering if I'll Mom be happy with the present. Will the surprise go well? First during our walk to the bar, but I went through with the plan for his sake. Knowing what my mother-in-law wore, I located her from behind and chose a seat where we could see her back. I thought this would allow us to see her face when she and the man moved, and it did. About 20 minutes after we sat down, probably intending to move to a hotel room, my mother-in-law intertwined her arm with the man's and started walking in a flirtatious manner. I clearly saw my mother-in-law's profile, worried that my father-in-law might not have noticed. I looked beside me to find him wide-eyed and speechless. After freezing for about 5 seconds, he chased after my mother-in-law, grabbed her hand which was entwined with the man's near the bar's exit. My mother-in-law looked shocked. "Hey, what are you doing here? Who is this man?" "Hey, sweaty, what's going on?" The one who was surprised by those words was the other man. Arip, he called my mother-in-law's name, demanding an explanation. In pleasure to the man, my father-in-law said, "She's my wife. I need to talk to her. Sorry, but you should leave for today," and then left the bar, still holding on to my mother-in-law's arm. I quickly paid for mine and my father-in-law's drinks and followed after them. On the way back, in the taxi, my mother-in-law finally seemed to grasp the situation, repeating, "It's not like that. You've got it all wrong." My father-in-law didn't say a word. Upon arriving home, my father-in-law told me, "I'm sorry." "No?" I responded with yes, but I was worried that my kind father-in-law might be swayed by my mother-in-law again. So, I took the evidence photos and sneaked back to my in-law's house, secretly watching the situation in the living room. What was that just now? "It's not what you think. You're misunderstanding," my mother-in-law insisted, making excuses. "It's boring spending my birthday alone when you're not here, so I went to the bar for a drink, drank too much, and the guy next to me offered to help. I was so dizzy and couldn't walk, so he said he'd take me to a taxi, and I leaned on him for support." As my mother-in-law smoothly made up excuses, my father-in-law seemed about to be fooled again. I couldn't stand it anymore and burst into the living room. Don't be fooled. She's having an affair. And it's not the first time she's met him. What? Moray, don't talk nonsense. First of all, eavesdropping is the worst. Please look at this. I handed the evidence photos to my father-in-law. What's this? These piles of paper? No. It's not me. These are doctored photos. She was shouting that, but my father-in-law didn't say anything and just looked through the photos one by one. And after he had seen them all, he shouted, "The worst one here is you." And we crushed. Do you understand what you have done? My mother-in-law argued back. I told you it's not me. These are doctored, okay, but she started to cry at my father-in-law's words. So you're saying Moara doctored a photo of you and a man she just met today. You were busy with work, and I was lonely. She tried to use her tears to get out of the situation as usual. My father-in-law silently watched her do this. I was worried that my mother-in-law's acting would fool my father-in-law again when David, who had just finished work, came into the living room. Moira, you were here. I came looking for you since you weren't home. Why is Mom crying? Next, without a word, my father-in-law handed the photos to David. My mother-in-law reached out to take them back, but David was quicker. What's this? As you can see, Mom was having an affair. It's not true. It's not. It was just a moment of madness. I was lonely. David, you understand, don't you? She tried to cling to David, but he shoved her away. Don't touch me. My mother-in-law broke down in exaggerated tears. To that, my father-in-law strongly said, "Leave." My mother-in-law repeated, "No, I absolutely refuse. Please forgive me." Okay, but my father-in-law didn't pay her any attention. Then, perhaps realizing that no more words would help, she staggered to her feet and began to pack her things. And when she had finished packing, she shouted at my father-in-law, "Fine. He listens to me, and he loves only me. I'll be happier with him," and left the house. However, she probably couldn't get in touch with the other man. It seemed he thought my mother-in-law was single, and he disappeared before she could sue him for damages for the affair. The next day, my mother-in-law came back, apologized to my father-in-law while crying, and asked for his forgiveness again. This time, it wasn't her exaggerated tearful act from before she left the house. She seemed genuinely sorry. However, my father-in-law didn't forgive her, and she was kicked out of the house, never to return. That same day, he changed the locks on the house. Half a year later, my in-laws got divorced. My mother-in-law had been adamant about not getting a divorce, saying, "I will absolutely not divorce, and I will fight with a lawyer." But since it was 100% her fault, the divorce was unavoidable, and no lawyer would take her case. They divorced. In lieu of suing my mother-in-law for damages, they agreed not to divide their assets. Since I was the one who had brought about the cause for their divorce, I apologized to my father-in-law. He said, "I'm glad you told me. I had no idea she was that kind of woman. I realized it thanks to you, Moray." And when he found out I had used a detective agency, he asked, "Do you know anything about the man's background?" Since I knew, I told him, and it seemed he met with the man. He was a graduate student, and he had thought my mother-in-law was a single 40-year-old. I didn't know she was married. "I'm really sorry." He seemed to be frantically apologizing. Since my mother-in-law had lied, my father-in-law didn't ask for damages. Instead, he said, "Please don't see Kate again." And to which the man replied, "I had no intention of seeing her again once I knew she was married. Even if she divorces you and is alone, I will not see her again." My mother-in-law, who had lived as a housewife using my father's credit cards, was struggling to get by every day since she was kicked out with no division of assets. She came near our house regularly, seemingly begging my father-in-law and David for forgiveness and asking for money. I also had several encounters where she asked me to mediate, standing in front of my house. It seems like my father-in-law grew tired of dealing with my mother-in-law. He decided to sell this house, which was under a mortgage, and build a new one somewhere else. Both my father-in-law and David mentioned the idea of living separately, saying, "Maybe this is for the best. This is a good chance for us to live apart." However, I had no complaints about my kind father-in-law, and I thought it would be tough for him to live alone, so I chose to live together with them. Since moving to the new house, I haven't had any complaints or sudden visits from my mother-in-law, and we have been living happily. My father-in-law always praises my housework, and since finding out about my pregnancy last month, both David and my father-in-law have started to proactively help out with the housework. This is my first pregnancy and childbirth, and although it's somewhat worrisome that my stressful mother-in-law is no longer around, with my kind husband and father-in-law by my side, I think everything is going to be alright.